Moominpapa at Sea by Tove Jansson. Part 2. It could scarcely have been more than 5:30 in the morning when Moomintroll was following the Groke's tracks through the garden. The ground had thawed again, but he could still see the places where she had sat. The grass there had turned quite brown. He knew that if she sat on the same spot for more than an hour, nothing would ever grow there again. The ground just died of fright. There were several spots like that in the garden, and the worst one, infuriatingly enough, was in the middle of the tulip bed. A wide path of dry leaves led all the way up to the veranda. That's where she had stood. She had remained outside the circle of light and stared at the lamp. She couldn't help it. She had to come as close as possible, and everything died. It was always the same. Everything she touched just died. Moomintroll imagined he was the Groke. He shuffled along slowly, all hunched up, through a pile of dead leaves. He stood still, waiting while he spread the mist round him. He sighed and stared longingly towards the window. He was the loneliest creature in the whole world. But without the lamp, it wasn't very convincing. Instead, only nice thoughts came into his head, thoughts of islands in the sea, and great changes taking place in all their lives. He forgot the Groke, and started to play a game as he walked between the long shadows cast by the morning sun. You had to walk only where the sun was shining. The shadows were the unfathomable depths of the sea. That is, of course, if one couldn't swim. Somebody was whistling in the woodshed. Moomintroll looked inside. Bright gold sunlight shone on a pile of wood shavings by the window, and there was a smell of linseed oil and resin. Moominpapa was busy putting a little oak door in the wall of his lighthouse. "Look at these iron clamps," he said. "They are buried in the rock, and this is how you climb up to the lighthouse. You have to be very careful if the weather's rough. Your boat is carried in towards the rock on the crest of a wave. When you jump off, get a firm grip and scramble up while the boat is flung back. When the next wave comes, you are safe. When you fight your way against the wind, holding on to this railing. When you open the door, but it's heavy. Now it slams behind you. You are inside the lighthouse. You can hear the roar of the sea in a distance through the thick walls. Outside it's roaring all around, and the boat is already a long way off." "Are we inside too?" asked Moomintroll. "Of course," said Moominpapa. "You're up here in the tower. Look, every window has real glass. Right at the top is the light itself, and it's red and green and white, and it flashes at regular intervals all night, so that boats know where to go." "Are you going to put a real light in it?" asked Moomintroll. "Perhaps you could put a battery underneath and somehow make it flash." "Of course I could," said Moominpapa, cutting some little steps to put in front of a lighthouse door. "But I haven't time just now. This is only a toy, actually, just a way of trying things out." Moominpapa laughed, a little embarrassed. And began poking about in his tool drawer. "Wonderful," said Moomintroll. "So long." "So long," said Moominpapa. The shadows were now much shorter. A new day was beginning, just as warm and just as beautiful. Moominmama was sitting on the steps doing nothing at all, which seemed very strange somehow. "Everybody's up so early this morning," said Moomintroll. He sat beside her, screwing his eyes up in the sun. "Did you know that there is a lighthouse on Papa's Island?" he said. "Of course I did," Moominmama answered. "He's been talking about it all summer. That's where we're going to live." There was so much to talk about that nothing was said. There was so much to talk about, but nothing was said. It was warm sitting there on the steps. Everything seemed to be so right. Moominpapa began to whistle Anchors Away, something he did rather well. "I'll make some coffee soon. I just thought I'd sit here and think. It's been quite a night." But the lighthouse was calling to them. They knew that they must go to the island, and go soon. The Lighthouse. On the all-important evening of their departure, the wind had moved towards the east. It had got up soon after 12, but they had decided not to leave before sunset. The sea was warm and deep blue, just as blue as it was in the crystal ball. The jetty was piled high with luggage, right up to the bathing house, where the boat was lying tied up. It was bobbing up and down, with its sail hoisted, and a hurricane lamp was burning at the top of the mast. On the beach it was already getting dark. "Of course we ran the risk of it being calm tonight," said Moominpapa. "We could have left immediately after lunch, but on an occasion like this we must wait for sunset. Setting out in the right way is just as important as the opening lines in a book. They determine everything." He sat in the sand next to Moominmama. "Look at the boat," he said. "Look at the adventure. A boat by night is a wonderful sight. This is the way to start a new life, with a hurricane lamp shining at the top of the mast, and the coastline disappearing behind one as the whole world lies sleeping. Making a journey by night is more wonderful than anything in the world." "Yes, you're right," replied Moominmama. "One makes a trip by day, but by night one sets out on a journey." She was rather tired after all the packing, and a little worried in case something important had been forgotten. The pile of luggage looked enormous now that it was all over on the jetty, but she knew how little it would seem when they unpacked. A whole family needs such an awful lot of things in order to live through a single day in a proper way. But now, of course, things were different. Now the proper thing to do was that they should begin an entirely new life, and that Moominpapa should provide everything they needed, look after them, and protect them. Life must have been too easy for them up till now. It's strange, Moominmama thought. Strange that people can be sad and even angry because life is too easy. But that's the way it is, I suppose. The only thing to do is to start life afresh. "Don't you think it's dark enough now?" she said. "Your hurricane lamp looks really lovely against the sky. Perhaps we might start now." "Just a moment, I must get my bearings," said Moominpapa. He spread out the map on the sand and stared at the island, all by itself right out in the open sea. He was very serious. He sniffed in the wind for a while and tried to get his sense of direction, something he hadn't had to use for a long time. Our ancestors never needed to worry about finding the right course. It came to them naturally of its own accord. It's a pity that the instinct gets weaker if you don't use it. After a while, Moominpapa felt that he was sure he had the right course. He knew which way to go, so they could set sail. He put his head straight and said, "Let's be off. But you're not to lift a thing. We'll do all the heavy work. Just go aboard." Moominmama nodded and somewhat wearily dragged herself to her feet. The sea had turned violet, and the line of the forest along the shore looked soft and dark. She was very sleepy, and suddenly felt everything was a little unreal, a slow, fantastically lit dream in which one walks through heavy, heavy sand without getting anywhere. The others were on the jetty, putting the luggage on board. The storm lantern swayed to and fro, and the silhouette of the jetty and the bathing house looked like a long spiky dragon against the evening sky. She could hear little Mai laughing, and behind her the cries of night birds, still awake in the forest. "It's so beautiful," said Moominmama to herself. "Beautiful and just a little strange. Now I've time to think about it. The whole thing is rather wonderful. But I wonder whether Papa will mind if I take a little nap in the boat." The grog slunk through the garden after sunset, but this evening there was no lamp on the veranda. The curtains had been taken down, and the water butt had been turned upside down. The key hung on its nail above the door. She was used to deserted houses, and she saw at once that no one would light a lamp here for a long time to come. She shuffled slowly back up to the slope towards the cliff. For a moment the crystal ball caught her reflection, but when once more was filled with its usual unreal deep blue. The forest caught its breath in fear as she approached. Strange little sounds could be heard from under the moss. Branches rustled with fright, and the lights of tiny eyes went out everywhere. Without pausing, she went up to the top of the cliff overlooking the southern shore and gazed out over the sea, now growing dark as night fell. She could see the hurricane lamp at the top of the mast of the Adventure quite clearly, a lonely star gliding past the last islands, all the time moving farther out towards the open sea. She gazed at it for a long time, for she was never in a hurry. Time for her was endless and passed very slowly. Time for her contained nothing except the occasional lamps which were lit as autumn approached. Now she glided down the ravine towards the beach. Behind her she left big shapeless footprints, as though a seal had dragged itself to the edge of the water. The waves drew back as she approached, and then hesitated as if they didn't know what to do next. The water became smooth and still round the dark hem of her skirt and began to freeze. For a long time she stood there, while a cloud of freezing mist gathered round her. Now and then she slowly lifted one of her feet, and the ice crackled and became thicker and thicker. She was building an island of ice for herself in order to reach the hurricane lamp. It was out of sight behind the islands now, but she knew it was there somewhere. If it went out before she got to it, it wouldn't matter. She could wait. They would light another lamp some other evening. They always did, sooner or later. Moominpapa was steering the boat. He held the rudder tightly in one of his paws, feeling that he and the boat understood each other. He was completely at peace with himself. His family looked just as tiny and helpless as they had looked in a crystal ball. He was guiding them safely across the vast ocean through the silent blue night. The hurricane lamp lit the way, just as if Moominpapa had drawn a firm bright line across the map, saying, "From here to there. That's where we're going to live. Where my lighthouse will be the center of the world. It will tower proudly above the dangers of the ocean at its feet." "You don't feel the cold, do you?" he shouted happily. "Have you wrapped the blanket round you?" he asked Moomin "Look, we've left the last island behind us now, and soon it will be the darkest part of the night. Sailing at night is very difficult. You have to be on the lookout all the time." "Why, of course, dear," said Moomin who was lying curled up in the bottom of the boat. "This is all a great experience," she thought. The blanket had got a little wet and she moved gingerly towards the windward side, but the ribs of the boat got in the way of her ears all the time. Little Mice sat in the bow of the boat, humming monotonously to herself. "Mama," whispered Moomin, "what happened to her to make her like that? What happened to her to make her like that? Who?" "The Grog. Did somebody do something to her to make her so awful?" "No one knows," said Moomin drawing her tail out of the water. "It was probably because nobody did anything at all. Nobody bothered about her, I mean. I don't suppose she remembers anyway, and I don't suppose she goes around thinking about it either. She's like the rain or the darkness, or a stone you have to walk around if you want to get past. Do you want some coffee? There is some in the thermos in the white basket." "Not just now," said Moomin "She's got glassy eyes just like a fish. Can she talk?" Moomin sighed and said, "No one talks to her, or about her either. Otherwise she gets bigger and starts to chase one, and you mustn't feel sorry for her. You seem to imagine that she longs for everything that's alight, but all she really wants to do is to sit on it so that it'll go out and never burn again. And now I think I might go to sleep for a while." Pale autumn stars had come out all over the sky. Moomin lay on his back looking at the hurricane lamp, but he was thinking about the Grog. If she was someone you mustn't talk to or about, then she would gradually vanish and not even dare to believe in her own existence. He wondered whether a mirror might help. With lots and lots of mirrors one could be any number of people, seen from the front and from the back, and perhaps these people might even talk to each other. Perhaps. Everything was silent. The rudder creaked softly, and they all slept. Moominpapa was alone with his family. He was wide awake, more wide awake than he had ever been before. Far away, the Grog decided towards morning that she would set off. The island under her was black and transparent, with a sharp bowsprit of ice pointing south. She gathered up her dark skirts, hanging around her like the leaves of a faded rose. They opened out and rustled, lifting themselves like wings. So the Groke's slow journey over the sea began. She moved her skirts upwards, outwards, and downwards, like slow swimming strokes in a frozen air. The water drew back in scared choppy waves, and she floated on into the dawn with a cloud of drifting snow behind her. Against the horizon she looked like a large reeling bat. She found it slow going, but somehow she managed. She had time. She had nothing else but time. The family continued all night and all the next day until it was night again. Moominpapa still sat at the rudder waiting to catch sight of his lighthouse. But the night was just deep blue, and no lighthouse could be seen flashing on the horizon. "We're on the right course," said Moominpapa. "I know we're set on the right course. With this wind we ought to get there by midnight, but we should have seen the lighthouse when it began to get dark." "Maybe some rotters put it out," suggested little Mai. "Do you think anyone would put a lighthouse out?" said Moominpapa. "You can depend on it that the lighthouse is working all right. There are some things one can be absolutely sure of. Sea currents, the seasons, the rising of the sun, for example. And that lighthouses always work too." "We shall see it soon," said Moomin Mamma. Her head was full of little thoughts, but she couldn't really get organized. "I do hope it's working," she thought. "He is so happy. I do hope there really is a lighthouse somewhere out there, and not just a bit of fly dirt after all. We can't possibly go home now, particularly after such a grand start. You can find big pink shells, but the white ones look very nice against black soil. I wonder whether the roses will grow out there." "Shush! I can hear something," said little Mai from the bow. "Be quiet, all of you! Something's happening." They all lifted their noses and stared into the night. The sound of oars reached their ears. The unknown boat gradually came nearer, gliding out of the darkness. It was a little gray boat, and the man rowing it was resting on his oars, looking at them quite undismayed. He looked very scruffy, but appeared to be quite calm. The light shone on his large blue eyes, which were as transparent as water. He had some fishing rods in the bow of his boat. "Do the fish bite at night?" asked Moominpapa. The fisherman turned and looked straight past them. He wasn't going to say anything. "Isn't there an island with a big lighthouse somewhere near here?" Moominpapa continued. "Why isn't it working? We ought to have seen it a long time ago." The fisherman glided past them in his boat. They could hardly hear him when he finally said something. "Can't say really. Go back home. You've come too far." He disappeared behind them. They listened for the sound of his oars, but could hear nothing in the silent night. "He was a little odd, wasn't he?" said Moominpapa uncertainly. "Very odd, if you ask me," said little Mai. "Quite nuts." Moomin Mamma sighed and tried to straighten her legs. "But so are most of the people we know. More or less," she said. The wind had dropped. Moominpapa sat bolt upright at the rudder with his nose in the air. "Now," he said, "I have a feeling we are there. We're coming in on the leeward side of the island, but I just don't understand why the lighthouse isn't working." The air was warm and full of the scent of heather. Everything was completely still, and then out of the night loomed an enormous shadow. The island itself was towering over them, looking at them carefully. They could feel its hot breath as the boat struck the sandy beach and came to a standstill. They felt they were being watched and huddled together, not daring to move. "Did you hear that, Mama?" whispered Moomintroll. Swift feet galloped up the beach, splashed a little, and then everything was quiet again. "It was only little My going ashore," said Moominmamma. She shook herself as though to break the silence, and began to poke about among her baskets, trying to get the box of earth with her roses over the side of the boat. "Now take it easy," said Moominpapa nervously. "I'll look after all this. Everything must be properly organized from the beginning. The boat is always the most important thing. You sit still and take it easy." Moominmamma sat down obediently, trying not to get in the way of the sail as it came down, and the boom as it swung backwards and forwards, while Moominpapa scrambled about in the boat, organizing things. The hurricane lamp lit up a circle of white sand and black water, and outside it there was nothing but darkness. Moominpapa and Moomintroll dragged the mattress ashore, but not without getting one corner of it wet. The boat heeled over, and the blue trunk pressed the rose bushes against the side of the boat. Moominmamma sat waiting with her nose in her paws. Everything was as it should be. In time she would probably get used to being looked after. Perhaps she would come to like it. Even now she slept for a moment or two. There was Moominpapa standing in the water and saying to her, "You can get out now, everything's ready." He was happy and wide awake, and his head was pushed right back. Higher up on the beach he had built a tent of the sails and the oars, looking like a big squatting animal. Moominmamma tried to see whether there were any shells on this new beach of theirs, but it was much too dark. They had promised her that there would be shells, big and rare ones such as are to be found far out to sea. "Here you are," said Moominpapa. "Now all you have to do is to sleep. I shall stand guard outside all night, so there is no need for you to be afraid. Tomorrow night you will be able to sleep in my lighthouse. If only I understood why it isn't working. Is it nice and cozy inside there?" "It's just fine," said Moominmamma, creeping in under the sail. Little My was off somewhere on her own as usual. It didn't matter really, as she was the one member of the family who seemed to manage all right by herself. Everything seemed to be going well. Moomintroll watched Moominmamma turn round once or twice on the damp mattress until she found her favorite spot, give a little sigh, and fall asleep. Of all strange things, that was the strangest. The way Moominmamma could sleep in this new place without unpacking, without making their beds, and without giving them a sweet before they went to sleep. She had even left her handbag behind her on the sand. It was a little bit frightening in a way, but at the same time cheering. It meant that all this was a real change, and not just an adventure. Moomintroll lifted his nose and peeped out from under the sail. There sat Moominpapa on guard, with the hurricane lamp in front of him. He cast a very large, long shadow. The whole of him looked much larger than usual. Moomintroll rolled himself into a ball again and put his paws under his warm tummy. He gave himself up to his dreams. They were blue and rocking like the sea had been that night. Gradually the morning came. Moominpapa was quite alone with his island, and with each hour that passed it became more and more his very own. The sky began to grow pale, and the rocks rose up in front of him in great undulating masses, and above them he could see the lighthouse. There it was at last, huge and black against the grey of the sky. It was much bigger than he had imagined it would be, for it was just the time when the first light makes one feel helpless and everything seems dangerous if one is alone and awake all by oneself. Moominpapa turned out the hurricane lamp and made the beach disappear. He didn't want the lighthouse to see him yet. A cold early morning wind blew in from the sea, and he could hear the cries of seagulls from somewhere on the other side of the island. As Moominpapa sat on the beach, the lighthouse seemed to rise higher and higher above him. It was just like his model that he hadn't had time to finish. Now he could see that the roof wasn't as pointed as he had thought, and that there was no rail. He gazed at the dark and deserted lighthouse for a long time, and gradually it began to grow smaller and more like the picture he had carried in his mind for so long. In any case, it's mine, he thought, and lit his pipe. I'll capture the lighthouse. I'll present it to my family and say, "This is where you're going to live. When we are safe inside, nothing dangerous can happen to us."